24/7 society. All right. So humans evolved to operate according to the biology in their brains that determine when they're awake and when they're asleep. So we're a diurnal animal. We're awake during the daylight. We sleep during the dark. Not all animals, of course, are diurnal. Some are nocturnal. That was the case for most of human history. Hominids, which is the line of animals we come from, have been around about 6 million years. So that was the case. And that was the case up until very, very recently. About 150,000 to 200,000 years ago, modern humans appear with this big bulging frontal lobe and these big parietal lobes. And from that point on, we start to see some rather dramatic changes. We see them spread across a large amount of space on the planet, and we see them begin to use time. And that means use the night. Now, in a very short period of time, once cheap energy was created and rapid modes of transportation, motor vehicles, trains, airplanes, humans operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. In fact, everything you think of as modern culture depends upon it. If we stopped night work, for example, the hundreds of millions of people who do it, the economies would collapse. In fact, if we stopped having people drive at night and tried to have everyone drive in the daytime, no one would drive anywhere because the highways would be clogged. Because capacity of systems does not grow as fast as utilization. So humans use day and night, and it's a fact of life. There are thousands of jets in the air on every given day moving people across time zones, countries, and it's nothing unique to the United States. This is in fact exactly what happens everywhere in the world that affluence, economic affluence, occurs. Wherever you can afford to build roads and better systems, they do it, and humans go everywhere. And that's been true going back even 5,000 to 10,000 years, that humans were making roads and doing this. So this is all accelerating, and we have more people awake more of the time. And that's what we arbitrarily refer to as the 24/7 society. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Now, in that mixture of a lot of people being awake a lot of the time, what happens to the biology that says you should be awake at night and sleep during the daytime? Or, sorry, it says you should be asleep at night and awake during the daytime. Well, that biology doesn't go away. In other words, the delusion that modern human brains have is that they can socially will away biological drives is just that. It's a delusion. That in fact people suffer the consequences. Let me give you an example. Night shift work is based on population studies of cancer rates, has been declared by the World Health Organization as a carcinogen. That's right. Just like tobacco, working the night shift is a carcinogen because breast and prostate cancer rates are elevated by night shift work. So disruption of this sleep and circadian or 24-hour biology causes problems. Does that mean humans will give up being awake at night, running hospitals at night, getting your orange juice shipped to you at night, television shows, telecommunications, computers, etc.? Absolutely not. In fact, if anything, it's accelerating. Again, the more affluence spreads across the globe, the more you see it accelerating. So it's not likely to change. So what are people doing? Well, some of this doesn't mean you have to lose sleep, but mostly it does mean that people reduce their sleep. How much sleep do humans need? Is the reduction too great? So everywhere you go, urban sprawl creates limited road capacity, and it means that rush hours spread out further and further. Again, this effect on the utilization of time. We also know that modern electronic systems that everybody loves are driving this equation. People who work long hours, sleep less, get up earlier because of the rush hour. They get in earlier. They come home, and believe it or not, they go to bed at the same time as the people who don't work. And they're going to bed because of television prime time. And they're getting up by alarm clocks. So social cues, those are social cues, and those cues control behavior now, not the biology. That's actually the problem. That social systems have tried to supersede the fundamental biology that leaves so many people at risk for sleepiness-related accidents and potentially cancer and potentially cardiovascular disease and all-cause death, even obesity. There are 40-plus epidemiologic studies worldwide suggesting that short sleep time is associated with elevated obesity, elevated body mass index, from children to adults, with cardiovascular risk and with all-cause mortality. So, but also, so is long sleep duration. So it's getting the right amount of sleep at the right circadian time that seems to be so important. We don't know if this is causal, but the associations are so common in all cultures looked at, from Asia to Europe to America and Australia, that it seems to be ubiquitous among humans. So that's the fundamental problem set. Being awake, more people awake, more of the time, all the time, with no signs that we intend to stop, reduce, or go back. In fact, if anything, it's accelerating to do it more. What do people do to stay awake when they're not alert because they haven't slept enough or they're awake at night? They take a stimulant. Now, the big focus in the media is often on these terrible drugs that you might take. Well, first of all, it's questionable whether some of these prescription drugs are so terrible, but that's not the stimulant people are taking in large mass. This is the stimulant people are taking in large mass. Caffeine, which is not a food, it's a stimulant. And it is a social naivete to call things that clearly have known biological stimulant effects foods as though somehow those aren't props to stay awake. So part of this is a disingenuousness in culture about what we label as bad and what's good. There's no evidence that caffeine is safer than some of the modern wake-promoting drugs that are used. Now that raises questions about, well, who should be on the wake-promoting drugs? Well, increasingly we're seeing an acknowledgement that millions of people suffer excessive sleepiness, say from night shift work or from jet lag, and people differ in their vulnerability, so this is the millions who are highly vulnerable to it, more so than those who are less vulnerable. Then the question is, should we treat them with medicines? Should we treat a lifestyle-induced effect, disturbing sleep, losing sleep, with medications? And people would say, oh, no, that would be terrible. I say, yes, that's what we're doing. Just the way we use statins to treat the growing obesity epidemic and cardiovascular risks, we know that it's only delaying it and hopefully will prevent some people from progressing to full-blown disease to keep the cost down. Well, in fact, I'm right because the FDA has approved. Not only do the medical organizations have shift work disorder and jet lag disorder on their nosology books, but the FDA has approved drugs for those. So the bottom line here is lifestyle. Social lifestyle is the fundamental problem. We have put our biology at risk by the behaviors that we engage in. And just as overeating is dangerous and lack of exercise, inadequate sleep and being awake at the wrong time are dangerous. But we have built societal systems and ingrained them in our behaviors that make it so valuable to do that that we won't acknowledge the risks we're posing. Well, another example would be school start times. We get teenagers up earlier and earlier because the bus systems, there aren't enough buses to hold all the kids, so we bring the teenagers in very early to high school, then the middle schoolers, then later and later we bring the younger kids in. The bottom line is, though, the studies on adolescents show they need huge amounts of sleep, 9, 10 hours a night. And so we're chronically sleep depriving them. We give them their their SAT tests for college on a Saturday morning after a week of minimal sleep. So this policy of constantly pretending like there's no biology to sleep-wake that matters for waking function is staggeringly disastrous and naive. And in fact, it is causing the problem that fatigued operators of airplanes, trains, cars, trucks, ships is the #1 problem identified by the National Transportation Safety Board for the past 20 years that's never been mitigated. It's the leading cause of catastrophic outcome in big systems. Okay, it's not distraction. It's not cell phone use. It's fatigue. Studies of people falling asleep in urban areas while they're driving and that show that it's widespread. It's as common as all distractions combined. So what we've got here is we've trivialized sleepiness and fatigue. We use a stimulant but don't call it a stimulant. We pretend like our social systems are so valuable and important that it's okay to override the biology. And then we live these somewhat destructive lifestyles and are shocked when something really bad happens, like somebody grounds the Exxon Valdez or runs the Staten Island ferry into the pier because they fell asleep because, oh, that's just horrible, we don't want them to fall asleep. And they shouldn't, because we think of sleepiness and safety as motivated behavior. And we don't understand that we're asking people to do things beyond the biological limits of humans. Now, what has that all led to? Just to wrap up. A focus on countermeasures, which most of you probably haven't heard. If a doctor treats someone, we call that an intervention or treatment. But when you're treating healthy people and trying to prevent them from doing something that's going to harm them, we call those countermeasures. It comes from military use of this stuff. So we use countermeasures. What are the countermeasures? Sleep on the job. We have sleeper berths in airplanes, in trains, in trucks. We take the sleeping environment with them so at least you can stop and sleep. Right now there's a controversy about medical residents. How long should they work? And if they work all night, could we give them a chance to sleep in the hospital? When you listen to both sides of that argument, each side behaves like it's the end of the world if you compromise on this and try to give them more sleep. It's quite remarkable, actually, how naive and emotional these arguments are when the facts are unequivocally clear and straightforward. We use increasingly machines to detect when people are impaired. And the age of machines, more so than the age of drugs, is what's going to change everything. Your car will monitor your face. It will know what you're doing. It'll know if it's in lane, if you're varying your speed or steering. And it'll know it in milliseconds, as fast or faster than your brain can know it. And it'll warn you, and it'll take control from you. Because typically we handle it through automating systems. So you're going to see much more technology used to deal with incapacitated humans, because humans won't stop doing this. You're going to see mathematical models used to predict your own vulnerabilities and how to optimize your schedules. But in the end, there's no substitute for the most fundamental intervention. Rational, intelligent decisions about how to live your life in a prudent manner. Get your sleep. Get your sleep over your social interactions. It's more important than social. It's more important than game playing. It's more important than reading a book. Get your sleep. The sleep we know every day resets memories, emotional and cognitive, reduces metabolic demand on the brain, keeps you alert so you can learn the next day. There's nothing I can think of more fundamental than that. So that's the conundrum. But I find it important in the ethics of society and neuroscience that to pretend that sleep or biological timing is anything other than fundamental properties of the neuroscience. We know where in the brain these occur, how they occur, etc. We don't know everything, but a lot of it is just naive in modern humans. And it is that social perspective, which is so diluted, that leads to a lot of the catastrophic and healthcare costs and disaster costs.